Imagine discovering that the gentle scholar you married to end a galactic war carries within him the dormant power of an entire species that once made the universe tremble. Picture the moment when love collides with legend, when the soft-spoken human who reads you poetry at night reveals why his people are whispered about in the darkest corners of space. This is the story of Princess Zaratiel, who thought she was making the ultimate sacrifice for peace, only to realize she had unknowingly bound herself to the most dangerous force in the galaxy. When ancient enemies emerge from the void seeking revenge against humanity, her quiet husband Marcus will show the universe why humans are not the weak, primitive species everyone believed them to be. Some powers are too terrible to unleash, some loves are too precious to lose, and some truths will shatter everything you thought you knew about the balance of power in the cosmos. What happens when the hunted become the hunters? What price must be paid when a species thought extinct returns with a vengeance? And can love survive when the mask of civilization falls away to reveal the apex predator lurking beneath? The wedding was supposed to end a war. Instead, it may have just started the most terrifying conflict the galaxy has ever seen. The great crystalline spires of Velcaron stretched toward 3 purple moons, their surfaces reflecting the gathering storm clouds that seemed to mirror Princess Zaratiel's mood. She stood before the massive viewing portal of her palace chambers, watching transport ships arrive from across the galaxy. Each vessel carried delegates, witnesses, and what felt like vultures come to watch her sacrifice herself for peace. Her reflection stared back at her from the transparent aluminum pale blue skin, marked with the silver traceries that marked her as royalty among the Velcari, forearms crossed in a gesture of resignation, and eyes that held the weight of an entire species' survival. Tomorrow, she would marry a human. A primitive, barely space-worthy human from a species so insignificant that most galactic databases listed them as a footnote. Your Highness. The voice belonged to Commander Thexiel, her childhood friend and the only person brave enough to speak truth to power in the Velcari court. His massive frame filled the doorway, his usually pristine uniform showing signs of the stress they were all under. The human delegation has arrived. Zaratiel closed her primary eyes while keeping her secondary pair focused on the ships below.
How many in his party?
3, Your Highness. Just 3. Thexiel's tone carried disbelief. The groom, 1 advisor, and 1 guard, that's all. She turned to face him fully, all 4 arms now spread in a gesture of confusion. 3. The hegemony brings a war fleet to escort their princess to marriage. The crystalline collective sends enough ships to glass a moon. And humanity sends 3 people? It gets stranger, Your Highness. They refuse the guest quarters in the diplomatic sector. They've set up camp in the lower gardens. The human Marcus Chen asked permission to sleep under the stars and feel the soil beneath his feet. Despite everything, Zaratiel almost smiled. Almost. What do our intelligence reports say about him? Thexiel activated his wrist display, projecting a holographic file into the air between them. Dr. Marcus Chen, age 32 by human reckoning, academic credentials in xenobiology, cultural anthropology, and something called comparative mythology. No military service. Bocking down. No political connections. His family runs a small agricultural operation on their homeworld. A farmer. The word came out flat. They're giving me to a farmer. A farmer with 17 advanced degrees, Your Highness. The human education system is intense. But yes, his family grows food. Zaratiel studied the image of her future husband. He looked unremarkable by any galactic standard. Brown hair, brown eyes, medium build, and that strange human trait of showing his teeth when he smiled. No visible weapons, no genetic modifications, no cybernetic enhancements. He looked soft, scholarly, and completely harmless. Remind me why we're doing this, she said, though she knew the answer. The Void Hunters, Your Highness. They've broken through our outer defense lines. 3 colonies have gone dark in the past month. Our fleets can't match their technology, and our allies are retreating to defend their own territories. She nodded grimly. The Void Hunters were a nightmare made real. A species of energy beings that consumed life force itself, leaving behind empty husks of worlds. They'd appeared from the galactic rim 6 months ago, and nothing seemed able to stop them. Every weapon that worked against matter-based enemies passed harmlessly through their forms, and the humans claim they can help because they say they have experience with similar entities. Something about their mythology and folklore containing accurate descriptions of energy parasites and methods to combat them. Texel's skepticism was evident. The Galactic Council was desperate enough to listen, desperate enough to arrange a marriage alliance with a species that barely qualified for membership. Zaratel touched the engagement pendant at her throat, a simple crystal that would bind her life force to her husband's according to ancient Valkyrie tradition. Once activated during the ceremony, her fate would be literally tied to his. If he died, she would follow within hours. What's their population again? 12 billion. Building. Single homeworld, no colonies until recently. We have 40 billion across 8 worlds, she laughed bitterly. They're asking the princess of an interstellar empire to marry into what amounts to a planetary tribe. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Texel accepted it, listened to his earpiece, and his expression grew troubled. Your Highness, there's been a development. The long-range sensors have detected a Void Hunter fleet moving toward human space. Zaratel felt her blood chill. How long? 72 hours at their current speed. Earth will be under attack before the week ends. The implications hit her like a physical blow. The marriage alliance was supposed to be the first step in a longer negotiation. If humanity was wiped out before they could demonstrate their supposed capabilities, her sacrifice would be meaningless. Worse, it would leave the Valkyrie facing the Void Hunters alone. Does the human delegation know? Unknown, Your Highness. Should we inform them? She considered. If Marcus Chen knew his homeworld was doomed, would he still go through with the marriage, or would he demand immediate military assistance that her people couldn't provide? The Valkyrie fleet was already stretched thin, and sending ships to defend Earth would leave critical worlds exposed. No, not yet. The decision felt like swallowing poison, but political necessity demanded it. Let's see what kind of man I'm marrying first. 2 hours later, Zaratel made her way to the lower gardens, having dismissed her usual retinue of guards and attendants. She wore a simple traveling robe with a hood that concealed her distinctive features. She wanted to observe her future husband without the weight of ceremony and protocol. The human camp was easy to find. It was the only place in the gardens where someone had started a fire. 3 small dome-shaped shelters surrounded a modest cooking fire, and the smell of something that might have been food drifted on the evening breeze. Dr. Marcus Chen sat cross-legged on a rough blanket, reading from what appeared to be an actual paper book. The primitive nature of it fascinated her. When most species had moved to neural interfaces or holographic displays, humans still printed knowledge on processed plant matter. The fire's unnecessary, she said, stepping into the light. The gardens are climate-controlled. He looked up without startle, as if he'd been expecting her. His eyes, brown like earth soil, she thought, studied her face with an intensity that was somehow both analytical and kind. Princess Zaratel, I assume? When she nodded, he gestured to a space beside him on the blanket. The fire isn't for warmth or cooking. It's for comfort. There's something about watching flames that helps humans think. She settled beside him, careful to keep proper distance while noting that he hadn't stood or bowed as protocol demanded. Either he was ignorant of proper etiquette, or he was deliberately establishing a different dynamic between them. What are you thinking about that requires such assistance? Marriage? He closed the book, something called Comparative Mythology of Earth According to the Spine, and looked at the fire. I've never been married before. In my culture, marriage is supposed to be about love, partnership, shared dreams. This situation is different. His honesty surprised her. Most political marriages involved elaborate pretenses about affection and mutual regard. Are you having second thoughts? No. The word came without hesitation. I understand what's at stake. My people need allies and yours need whatever help we can provide, but I'd rather be honest about the reality than pretend this is something it isn't. Which is, 2 strangers making a calculated gamble that they can build something real from a foundation of mutual necessity. Despite herself, Zaratel found his straightforwardness refreshing. Most politicians she knew could talk for hours without saying anything meaningful. Your people really think they can help against the Void Hunters? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. My species has a saying. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. We've always known there were predators that fed on life force itself. Passage. We just called them different names.
Such as race.
Specters, demons, vampires. He smiled at her surprised expression. What other species call mythology, we call ancestral memory. The stories weren't make-believe. They were survival guides passed down from the last time something like this happened. The last time, about 12,000 years ago, something nearly wiped out humanity. We went from a growing civilization to scattered tribes hiding in caves and forests. Most of our history from that period was lost, but the stories survived. Stories about things that fed on human life force and the methods that eventually drove them away. Zaratiel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Are you saying the Void Hunters have been to Earth before? I'm saying something very much like them was responsible for what human archaeologists call the Younger Dryas period, a sudden ice age that lasted over 1,000 years and nearly ended human civilization. Marcus prodded the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. The interesting thing is that every human culture that survived that period developed similar defensive traditions: salt circles, iron weapons, specific sound frequencies, running water, certain types of light. And you think these primitive methods will work against beings that can tear through modern starship hulls? I think the universe is stranger than most people imagine, and that sometimes old solutions work better than new ones. He looked at her directly. But more than that, I think humanity itself might be the real weapon. What do you mean? Marcus was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but carried an edge she hadn't heard before. Have you ever wondered why humanity developed so many myths about monsters? Why every culture independently came up with stories about vampires, wraiths, and demons? Why we developed elaborate folklore about fighting creatures that supposedly didn't exist? Because you have active imaginations? Because something spent thousands of years trying to farm us, and we learned to fight back? The firelight danced across his features, making his expression difficult to read. Other species seemed to have been lucky enough to avoid that particular evolutionary pressure. We weren't. The implications of what he was suggesting made her feel suddenly cold despite the fire's warmth. You're saying humanity is adapted to fight the Void Hunters? I'm saying that when the long night ends and dawn finally comes, predators learn to fear the prey that survived. He smiled then, the same harmless expression she'd seen in his file photo, but somehow the meaning had changed entirely. Question isn't whether we can help you fight them, Princess. The question is whether you're prepared for what happens when they discover that the galaxy's newest species remembers the old ways of ending things that should never have existed in the first place. Above them, the three purple moons continued their ancient dance across an alien sky. While somewhere in the darkness between stars, ancient hunters moved closer to a prey species that had been waiting 12,000 years for the chance to even the score. Zaratel looked at the man she would marry tomorrow. Really looked at him. And for the first time since the arrangement had been made, she wondered if she was the one making a bargain with something more dangerous than she understood. The dawn of the wedding day brought news that made Zaratel's stomach clench with dread. Commander Thexiel entered her chambers without ceremony, his face grim as death itself. The Void Hunter fleet has accelerated, Your Highness. They'll reach Earth in 18 hours. Zaratiel paused in the middle of her ceremonial preparations, her attendants frozen around her like statues. The traditional Velkari wedding garments felt suddenly heavy, layers of shimmering fabric that would bind her to ancient customs and modern necessities alike.
Have you informed the human delegation? No, Your Highness.
But their ship received a priority transmission an hour ago. Dr. Chen's expression afterward. Thexiel struggled for words. He didn't look surprised. Dirty. He looked ready. Ready for what? I don't know. But he sent a message back to his ship, and whatever he said made his security detail check their weapons. Through the curved walls of her chambers, Zaratiel could hear the gathering crowds. Representatives from dozens of worlds had come to witness this union, each with their own agenda. Some hoped to curry favor with humanity's mysterious new capabilities. Others came to watch what they assumed would be the last, desperate gambit of a dying species. How many of our allies have confirmed military support? Thexiel's silence was answer enough. None. She laughed bitterly. They'll watch me marry a doomed man from a doomed world, offer their condolences when the Void Hunters finish with Earth, and then negotiate favorable surrender terms when the enemy comes for them next. Our long-range scouts report strange energy readings from the human homeworld. Something's happening on Earth, but our sensors can't identify it. Zaratil turned to face him fully, her attendants scattering like startled birds. What kind of energy readings? Unlike anything in our databases, the patterns suggest massive coordinated activity across the entire planet, but the energy signature is biological, as if 12 billion humans were all doing something simultaneously. Preparing for war? Preparing for something? The ceremonial horns began to sound across the city, their deep tones announcing that the hour had arrived. Zaratil looked at herself in the mirror, a princess dressed for sacrifice, wrapped in the hopes of her people and the traditions of her ancestors. Commander, whatever happens today, promise me something. Of course, Your Highness. If the marriage fails to save us, if humanity falls and the Void Hunters come for our worlds, she met his eyes in the reflection. Make sure our people know we tried everything. The Grand Cathedral of Velkaran had been built to impress visitors from across the galaxy, its soaring architecture designed to humble foreign dignitaries and demonstrate Valkyrie power. Today, it felt like a tomb. Representatives from 40 worlds filled the crystal pews, their various atmospheric needs accommodated by personal environment fields that created a rainbow of colored barriers throughout the space. Zaratil walked the long aisle alone, as tradition demanded. Her father would normally have escorted her, but Emperor Corteil had died defending the outer colonies, leaving her to carry both crown and sacrifice. The weight of the ceremonial crown pressed down on her head like the expectations of 40 billion souls. At the altar, Marcus Chen waited in clothing that managed to be both formal and completely alien to her understanding of proper ceremony. Instead of the elaborate costumes favored by most galactic dignitaries, he wore what appeared to be a simple black suit made from some plant-based fabric. The only decoration was a small pin on his lapel, a design she couldn't identify that seemed to shift between geometric patterns when she wasn't looking directly at it. The human delegation had grown, she noticed. What had been 3 people yesterday was now perhaps 24, though she couldn't see where the extras had come from. They stood in a tight group near the altar, their attention focused not on the ceremony but on devices they held in their hands. Began the ancient words, her voice carrying across the cathedral in the formal tones that had bound Valkyrie nobility for 3,000 years. The ceremony was conducted in Old Valkyrie, a language so archaic that most of the gathered delegates would need their translation software to follow along. We gather in the sight of the eternal stars to witness the binding of 2 souls in purpose and destiny. Let the bride speak her oath. Zaratil's voice rang clear across the cathedral as she recited words her ancestors had spoken for millennia. I offer my life force to this union, my strength to this bond, my fate to this choice. Let the stars themselves bear witness that what I give freely cannot be taken by force. The binding pendant at her throat began to glow, responding to the bioresonance patterns in her voice. The ancient technology woven with spiritual tradition, it would link her life force to her husband's once he spoke the corresponding oath. Let the groom speak his oath. Marcus stepped forward, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked like something other than a peaceful academic. There was a stillness about him now, a complete calm that reminded her uncomfortably of predators she'd seen in nature documentaries. But instead of reciting the traditional human response that had been provided to him, he began to speak in Old Valkyrie. Time not just speak, he spoke it fluently, with the proper ceremonial inflections that took most natives years to master. I accept this binding not as surrender, but as alliance. I offer my strength to protect what is precious, my knowledge to illuminate what is hidden, my purpose to ensure what must be preserved endures. Shocked murmurs rippled through the cathedral. Learning Old Valkyrie should have been impossible for an alien, let alone mastering it to ceremonial standards. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate in the crystal walls themselves, I invoke the rite of escalation as recorded in the ancient texts. High Priestess Valandra froze, and was a pre-technological tradition, something from the days when Valkyrie marriages were strategic alliances between warrior clans. It hadn't been invoked in over 1,000 years. The rite of escalation permits the groom to expand the marriage bond to include allied clans in times of existential threat, Marcus continued, still speaking in perfect ceremonial Old Valkyrie. I invoke this right on behalf of humanity and request binding alliance with the Valkyrie in accordance with the oldest laws. The silence in the cathedral was absolute. Porty, what Marcus had just done was transform a simple political marriage into something far more significant, a formal alliance between species that would be binding under the most ancient galactic laws. The rite of escalation requires proof of worthiness, the Landra said carefully. The groom must demonstrate that his people possess strength worthy of alliance. Then let me show you what humanity brings to this union. Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew what appeared to be a simple communication device. When he spoke into it, his words were in a human language none of them recognized, but his tone was unmistakably a command. Above the cathedral, visible through the crystal dome, the sky began to change. Ships were appearing in Valkyron's atmosphere, not arriving through normal space, but materializing as if they'd been invisible until this moment. Dozens of them, then hundreds, in configurations unlike anything in known galactic databases. They moved with a fluid grace that defied conventional physics, their hulls seeming to bend light around them. Cloaking technology, someone whispered. Impossible, another voice replied. Nothing that large should be able to maintain stealth fields. More ships continued appearing, until the sky above the cathedral was filled with a fleet that dwarfed anything the Valkyrie had ever assembled. The crowd of delegates began to murmur, then talk louder, then express open alarm as the true scale of what they were seeing became clear. Marcus spoke into his device again, and this time Zaratel's translation software caught fragments of what seemed to be English. Phoenix Protocol is authorized, but in planetary awakening. What's happening, she whispered to him. Something we hoped we'd never have to do again. His expression was grim as he looked up at the ships. 12,000 years ago, humanity was nearly wiped out by entities like the Void Hunters. We survived, but only by making changes to ourselves that we hoped we'd never need again. What kind of changes? Before he could answer, new alerts began sounding throughout the cathedral. Emergency broadcasts from across the galaxy were being received, all reporting the same impossible news. Human colonies that weren't supposed to exist were declaring themselves. Worlds that had been listed as uninhabitable or empty for millennia suddenly showed massive human populations. We didn't have 12 billion people, Marcus said quietly. We had 40 billion. We just kept most of them hidden. The binding pendant at Zaratel's throat was now blazing with light, responding to energies she couldn't identify. The marriage bond was activating, but not in any way the ancient traditions described. But instead of linking her life force to one person, she could feel connections forming to something vast and complex. The Void Hunter fleet has been detected approaching Earth, came an announcement from the human delegation. Estimated time to engagement, 4 hours. Marcus looked at her then, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that made her understand why humanity might have developed so many myths about monsters. Princess Zartel, I need you to make a choice. The marriage bond is forming, and once it's complete, you'll be linked not just to me, but to what humanity becomes when we stop pretending to be harmless. What do you mean? I mean that every human you've ever met has been consciously suppressing instincts and capabilities that we developed during the last war against entities like the Void Hunters. We've been playing the role of a peaceful, primitive species because we hoped we'd never need to be anything else. The pendant was burning against her throat now, and she could feel something awakening in response. Not just the traditional life bond of Valkyrie marriage, but something deeper and more primal. What happens when you stop suppressing those capabilities? Marcus smiled, and this time there was nothing harmless about it at all. Ask me in 4 hours when the Void Hunters reach Earth, and discover what happens when you hunt something that's been preparing for you for 12,000 years. Above them, the human fleet had finished materializing, and now Zaratil could see that each ship was inscribed with symbols that seemed to move and shift when observed. The same symbols, she realized, that Marcus wore on his lapel. The High Priestess completed the binding ceremony with shaking hands, her voice barely audible as she pronounced them united in marriage and alliance. As the final words were spoken, Zaratil felt the bond snap into place like a key turning in a lock. Instantly, she was flooded with sensations that weren't her own. She could feel Marcus beside her, but also thousands of other minds, human minds, all connected in ways that shouldn't be possible. And underneath it all, something vast and patient and absolutely ruthless stirring to wakefulness. "Welcome to the family, Princess," Marcus said as alerts began flooding in from across the galaxy reporting human fleets emerging from hiding places that had been concealed for millennia. "I hope you're ready to learn what we're really like when we're not trying to be civilized." Through their new bond, she felt him reaching out to something that spanned star systems, and heard his voice echo in her mind alongside thousands of others. "This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Network. Protocol. The long hunt begins." The transformation began 2 hours after the wedding ceremony, as reports flooded in from across the galaxy that forced every delegate in the cathedral to question everything they thought they knew about humanity. Zaratil sat in the emergency command center that had been hastily established in the palace's war room, watching holographic displays that painted an impossible picture. Through her bond with Marcus, she could feel the awakening of something that had been dormant for millennia, and it terrified her more than the approaching Void Hunters ever had. "These numbers can't be correct," Admiral Krekstar of the Hegemony Navy muttered, his crystalline features reflecting the light from dozens of tactical displays. "Humans don't have 40 billion people. They don't have faster-than-light communication networks. They don't have ships that can appear and disappear at will." "They do now," Marcus replied calmly. He stood before a massive holographic representation of known space, his hands moving through three-dimensional controls that shouldn't have been compatible with human physiology. Or rather, they always did. "Guys, we just stopped hiding it." The displays showed human fleets emerging from concealment across known space. Ships that had been mistaken for asteroids, space debris, or navigational hazards were revealing themselves as massive vessels equipped with technology that defied current understanding. Purge. Worse, many of these ships were positioned near every major population center in the galaxy. "You've been watching us," Zaratil said, the realization hitting her like physical blow. "For how long?" "Since first contact with galactic civilization, we needed to understand what kind of universe we'd emerged into, whether the entities that nearly destroyed us 12,000 years ago had influenced other species, whether we were walking into another trap." Through their marriage bond, she felt his emotions beneath the calm exterior, not malice, but a bone-deep wariness that spoke of species-wide trauma never fully healed. Humanity hadn't been hiding from the galaxy out of primitive fear. They'd been studying it, learning its weaknesses, preparing for threats that might emerge from any direction. "The Void Hunters are 3 hours from Earth," reported Commander Thexiel. "Long-range sensors show a fleet of approximately 5,000 energy entities, the concentration we've ever detected." "They're not random," Marcus said, his attention split between the tactical displays and something else. Communication networks that Zaratil could sense through their bond but couldn't fully comprehend. "This is a harvesting fleet. They've been building numbers by consuming other species, growing stronger with each civilization they devour. Yet our combined fleets can't face 5,000 of them," Admiral Krekstar admitted. "The mathematical reality is that nothing we have can damage energy beings of that magnitude."
"Your mathematics are based on conventional physics," Marcus replied.
But conventional physics don't apply to entities that exist primarily as psychic energy feeding on life force. He gestured to the holographic display, which shifted to show Earth surrounded by what appeared to be the largest space battle in galactic history. Thousands of Void Hunter entities were descending on humanity's homeworld, their forms visible as dark tears in space itself. But as they approached Earth's atmosphere, something impossible was happening. The planet itself was fighting back. "What are we looking at?" Zaratil whispered. 12 billion humans acting in perfect coordination," Marcus answered. "Every person on Earth is participating in a psychic network that we've maintained since the last invasion. It's been dormant for most of our history, activated only during species-wide threats." The display showed energy patterns erupting from Earth's surface, not technological weapons, but something far more primal. The entire planet appeared to be generating a field that was disrupting the Void Hunters' cohesion, forcing them back into forms that could be affected by physical laws.
Impossible, Admiral Krekstar breathed.
"An entire species can't act as a single organism." "Most species can't," Marcus agreed. "But humanity developed collective consciousness as a defense mechanism during the last invasion." When Void Hunters feed on individual minds, they're nearly unstoppable. But when they encounter a unified psychic field generated by an entire species, on the display, Void Hunters were beginning to take physical form as Earth's collective will forced them to solidify. And as they became solid, they became vulnerable to the weapons that human fleets were bringing to bear. But these weren't the primitive kinetic weapons that humanity was supposed to possess. The ships emerging from concealment around Earth carried armaments that seemed to bend reality itself. Weapons that fired controlled gravity wells, beams that aged their targets at accelerated rates, projectiles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. How? Zaratiel asked. How did you develop this technology? We didn't develop it, Marcus said quietly. We took it. During the last invasion, we captured Void Hunter technology and spent 12,000 years learning to use their own capabilities against them. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just survived their first encounter with entities like the Void Hunters. They'd won, captured enemy technology, and spent millennia preparing for the possibility that more would come. Through their bond, Zaratiel felt Marcus's mind touching something vast and distributed. The collective consciousness of 40 billion humans spread across hundreds of hidden colonies. For a moment, she experienced what it felt like to be part of a species-wide network, to have her individual thoughts enhanced by connection to minds beyond counting. It was intoxicating. It was terrifying. And it explained why humanity had seemed so peaceful and unremarkable when they'd first made contact with galactic civilization. You've been pretending, she said. This whole time you've been pretending to be primitive. We've been trying to be peaceful, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. We hoped we'd never need to show what we really are. Dear, we hoped the galaxy was safe, that the Void Hunters were extinct, that we could build a civilization based on cooperation rather than constant readiness for war. But you were wrong. We were wrong. The battle around Earth was intensifying. Human fleets that had emerged from concealment were engaging Void Hunter entities with weapons that should have been impossible. Ships that looked like they were made from crystallized shadow-fought beings of pure destructive energy, and somehow the humans were winning. Admiral Chen, came a voice from the communication array. Another human speaking in English that Zaratiel's translation software identified as coming from Earth itself. Void Hunter command entities have been identified. The Phoenix Protocol authorization confirmed. Are we cleared for final phase? Marcus Admiral Chen, she realized. Looked around the command center at the assembled galactic representatives. Every delegate was watching the displays with expressions ranging from awe to terror as they witnessed humanity's true capabilities being revealed. Princess, he said, turning to Zaratiel, what I'm about to authorize will change everything. A corruption of humanity is capable of. When we stop holding back, there will be no going back to the way things were. What do you mean? I mean that peaceful coexistence requires both sides to choose peace. The Void Hunters have made it clear that they intend to consume every living thing in this galaxy. So we're going to show them what happens when they hunt a predator species that's had 12,000 years to prepare for this moment. He turned back to the communication array. All units, this is Admiral Chen. Execute Thanatos Protocol. Begin harvesting operations. The display changed again, and Zaratiel felt her blood freeze as she realized what she was seeing. Human ships weren't just destroying the Void Hunters. They were capturing them, containing them, and doing something to them that caused the energy beings to visibly diminish. We're feeding on them, she whispered. They consume life force, Marcus replied, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the marriage bond between them. But humanity learned to reverse that process. We don't just destroy Void Hunters. We drain their energy and add it to our collective strength. Through their bond, she felt him accessing power sources that defied comprehension. Not just the psychic energy of 40 billion humans, but captured life force from thousands of defeated enemies accumulated over millennia of hidden warfare. How many times has this happened before? Admiral Krexstar demanded. How many species have you harvested? Only predators, Marcus answered. Only entities that sought to destroy rather than coexist. The Void Hunters aren't the first energy parasites we've encountered. They won't be the last. The battle around Earth was ending with shocking speed. Void Hunter entities that had seemed unstoppable were being systematically captured or destroyed by human forces, that fought with the coordination of a single organism and the ruthlessness of a species that had survived the impossible. About the real shock came when the displays updated to show similar battles occurring across the galaxy. Human fleets that had been hidden near every major population center were engaging Void Hunter advanced forces that most worlds hadn't even detected yet. "You knew they were coming," Zaratiel said. "You knew exactly where they would strike. We've been tracking their approach for months." The Marriage Alliance was never just about gaining allies. It was about making sure galactic civilization survived what was coming. "By using us as bait?" Marcus turned to face her directly, and she saw in his eyes an emotion that took her a moment to identify: regret. By ensuring that when the harvest was complete, there would be civilized species left to rebuild with. The Void Hunters weren't just targeting Earth. They were planning to consume every inhabited world in this galaxy. We couldn't protect everyone directly, but we could position ourselves to save as many as possible. The displays showed the final phase of the battle. Void Hunter command entities, beings of such concentrated malevolence that their mere presence had been twisting space around them, were being contained in fields of crystallized human will and systematically drained of their essence. "It's over," reported the voice from Earth. "All hostile entities have been neutralized or contained. Harvesting operations complete. Total energy acquired. Approximately 47 million standardized life force units." The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had just absorbed the life energy of an entire Void Hunter invasion fleet, adding their power to an already incomprehensible collective strength.
What happens now?
Zaratiel asked. Marcus looked at the assembled galactic representatives, his expression thoughtful. "Now we have a choice, preparing for this war, but we never wanted to fight it. We hoped we could remain hidden, let other species live in peace while we stood ready to defend against threats they couldn't imagine. But that's no longer possible. No, the galaxy has seen what we really are. The question is whether we can build a civilization together based on that truth, or whether fear will make cooperation impossible." Through their bonds, RTL felt the vast network of human consciousness considering that question across hundreds of worlds, 40 billion minds connected in ways that transcended individual identity, sharing thoughts and emotions and memories that spanned millennia. And in that shared experience, she sensed something that gave her hope. Underneath the terrible power and the capacity for destruction that humanity had revealed, she felt their genuine desire for peace. They had become monsters to fight monsters, but they remembered what it was like to be human. The Marriage Alliance stands," she said formally, addressing both Marcus and the galactic representatives. "The Valkyrie will honor our commitment to humanity. Even knowing what you know now," she thought of the power flowing through their bond, the connection to something that could span star systems and drain the life from entities that fed on entire civilizations. She thought of the choice her people now faced: alliance with a species that had just revealed itself as perhaps the most dangerous force in the galaxy, or potential enmity with predators who had spent 12,000 years learning to hunt things that hunted them. "Especially knowing what I know now," she said. "The galaxy is a dangerous place. It's better to have humanity as allies than enemies." Marcus smiled, and for the first time since the ceremony it looked genuinely peaceful. He said, "Then let's see if we can build something better than what came before." Above them, human fleets were beginning the long journey back to hidden bases scattered across the galaxy, carrying with them energy harvested from an ancient enemy. The war was over, but its consequences were just beginning. 3 weeks after the revelation that shattered galactic civilization's understanding of itself, Zaratiel stood in the observation deck of a human vessel, unlike anything she'd thought possible. The ship, which Marcus called Remembrance, existed partially outside normal space, its corridors seeming to stretch and compress based on the observer's needs rather than physical architecture. Through the marriage bond, she'd learned that this wasn't technology in any conventional sense. It was applied consciousness, human will given physical form through methods they'd learned from studying captured Void Hunter essence. The ship responded to thought because it was, in a very real sense, alive. The Galactic Council has officially dissolved, reported Ambassador Valkyrin, his image flickering in the holographic communicator that dominated the ship's central chamber. His usual calm had been replaced by barely controlled panic. 17 member species have withdrawn from all mutual defense treaties. The hegemony is mobilizing its entire fleet. They're against humanity? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Against what they perceive as an existential threat. B. The revelation that humans possess the capability to drain life force from energy beings has terrified civilizations that remember their own encounters with such entities. They believe humanity could do to them what you did to the Void Hunters. Zaratiel felt Marcus's emotions through their bond. Disappointment, resignation, and underneath it all a deep weariness that came from having hoped for something better. They're not wrong to be afraid, he said quietly. We do possess that capability. But you wouldn't use it against innocent species, she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she realized she was asking rather than stating. Define innocent. The answer came not just from Marcus, but through their bond from the vast network of human consciousness that she was now peripherally connected to. 40 billion minds sharing thoughts and memories across hundreds of hidden colonies, and in that shared awareness she sensed humanity's true perspective on galactic civilization. They had watched, for generations since first contact, they had observed other species with the analytical detachment of apex predators studying potential prey. They had noted which civilizations showed aggressive expansion patterns, which ones exploited weaker species, which ones might pose future threats to human survival. The Valkyrie were considered allies not because of any particular virtue, but because their culture emphasized protective traditions and they had never shown interest in conquering other worlds. The hegemony, by contrast, had a long history of subjugating primitive species and exploiting their resources. You've been categorizing us, Zaratiel said, the realization hitting her like cold water. All this time you've been deciding which species deserve to survive. We've been preparing for every possible scenario, Marcus corrected. Predators that consume entire civilizations. It also contains civilizations that become predators given sufficient opportunity. We've learned to recognize the difference. Through the bond, she felt him accessing files that contained detailed analysis of every species humanity had encountered. Psychological profiles, cultural assessments, technological capabilities, expansion patterns, and, most chillingly, threat rankings that determined what level of response each species would face if they ever became hostile to human interests. The Crystalline Collective rates as minimal threat due to their religious prohibition against violence, she heard through the network connection. The Hegemony rates as severe threat due to historical patterns of expansion and resource exploitation. The Valkyrie rate as potential allies due to defensive cultural traditions and limited territorial ambitions. You're talking about entire species as if they're chess pieces, she said. Politics ultimately becomes a game where the stakes are survival itself. Marcus gestured to the holographic displays showing fleet movements across the galaxy. The hegemony is mobilizing 3,000 ships. The Crystalline Collective has closed its borders. The Trade Federation is demanding tribute payments in exchange for continued commerce. Fear makes species predictable, came another voice through the network. One of Marcus's advisors speaking from a different ship entirely. We've seen this pattern before. When a civilization encounters something they can't understand or control, they either submit or attack. There are very few other options. Ambassador Velcuron's image flickered with interference from whatever security measures the human ship was employing. Princess, with respect, your marriage has created a crisis that threatens to tear apart everything our species have built together. Perhaps it would be better if I dissolved the marriage bond? Zarathiel interrupted. Returned home and pretended this never happened? The Galactic Council would certainly view such a decision favorably. She looked at Marcus, feeling through their bond the way her words affected him. Yeah. Not anger or disappointment, but acceptance tinged with sadness. He had expected this possibility, she realized. Had probably calculated the probability that she would choose political necessity over their alliance. And what happens when the next Void Hunter fleet arrives? She asked. What happens when something even worse emerges from the dark between stars? Do we pretend humanity doesn't exist and hope our conventional weapons will be sufficient? Your Highness? No. The word carried more force than she'd intended, enhanced by harmonics that came from her partial connection to the human collective consciousness. I've seen what's really out there. I've felt through this bond what humanity has experienced. The galaxy is full of predators, Ambassador. The only question is whether we choose to align with predators that hunt other predators, or with prey species that refuse to acknowledge the nature of the universe they live in. Ambassador Velkaran's image cut out, leaving them alone with the holographic displays showing the dissolution of galactic civilization, and species after species was withdrawing from mutual defense treaties, closing borders, and mobilizing military forces. The revelation of humanity's true nature had shattered the comfortable illusion that the galaxy was becoming a more peaceful place. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly. "We hoped it wouldn't come to this." "Did you?" "Duh. Or did you expect exactly this reaction?" To the Bond, she felt his honest answer before he could speak it aloud. Humanity had modeled hundreds of scenarios for how galactic civilization might react to learning the truth about human capabilities. The current crisis fell well within their predicted parameters. "Both," he admitted. "3. We hoped for better, but prepared for worse." And of galactic civilization, a galactic civilization that unites against humanity and forces us to demonstrate why that's a bad idea. The casual way he said it made her blood chill. Through their bond, she could sense contingency plans that existed in the collective human consciousness, detailed strategies for dealing with species that chose hostility over cooperation. The plans were comprehensive, ruthless, and would result in the complete restructuring of galactic civilization under human dominance. "You would conquer the galaxy? We would do whatever was necessary to ensure human survival." "If that meant conquering the galaxy," he shrugged. "The universe doesn't care about our preferences." A new alert chimed through the ship's systems. "Admiral Chen," came a voice from the navigation station. "We're receiving priority transmission from the hegemony fleet. They're demanding our immediate surrender for crimes against galactic security." Marcus's expression didn't change, but through the bond Zaratil felt the vast network of human consciousness shift into a new configuration. Ipilian minds suddenly focused with laser-like intensity on the approaching threat. "Response?" asked the navigation officer. "Standard diplomatic protocol," Marcus replied. "Inform them that humanity appreciates their concern and would be happy to discuss their grievances through appropriate channels. Sir, they're targeting us with weapons designed to disrupt energy-based life forms they believe were similar to the Void Hunters." Through the bond, Zaratil felt something that might have been amusement ripple through the human network. The hegemony's weapons were indeed designed to disrupt energy beings, but humanity's technology was based on captured Void Hunter science. They had defenses against such weapons that the original owners had never imagined. "Let them target us," Marcus said calmly. "Sometimes demonstration is more effective than explanation." The next few minutes unfolded with terrible inevitability. The hegemony fleet opened fire with weapons that should have disrupted human technology and rendered their ships helpless. Instead, the energy beams were absorbed into the human vessels' hulls, adding to their power reserves and making them stronger. "Impossible," came a transmission from the hegemony flagship. "Those weapons should have disabled every system on their ships." "Should have," Marcus agreed, speaking into the communication array. "But didn't." "Admiral Krekstar, would you like to know why?" "You're not human," came the reply, heavy with accusation. "You're some variant of the Void Hunters, posing as a primitive species to infiltrate galactic civilization." "We're human," Marcus replied, "but we're human that have spent 12,000 years learning to defend against entities that feed on life force. Your weapons work by disrupting the bioelectric fields that sustain organic consciousness. We learned to protect those fields by integrating them with crystallized Void Hunter essence. That you're infected by them. We consumed them. There's a difference between being infected by a parasite and eating it for dinner." The communication channel went silent for a long moment. Through her bond with Marcus, Zaratil could sense other human fleets moving into position throughout the galaxy. Not just the ships that had revealed themselves during the Void Hunter attack, but thousands more that had remained hidden even during that crisis. "How many ships do you have?" she asked. "Enough," came the answer from the collective consciousness. "We've been building fleets for 12,000 years. Every human colony, every hidden base, every covert operation has been preparing for the possibility that we might need to fight the entire galaxy." "Admiral Chen," came Admiral Krekstar's voice over the communication array, "we demand proof that humanity poses no threat to legitimate galactic civilization." "What kind of proof would satisfy you? Submit to comprehensive scanning by neutral parties? Open your colonies to inspection?" provide complete technical specifications for your weapons and defensive systems. Through the bond, Zaratil felt the ripple of reaction that request caused in the human network. It would be like asking the species to hand over every military secret and strategic advantage they possessed. Counterproposal, Marcus said. Thalides, humanity will provide guarantees of non-interference with species that demonstrate no hostile intent toward human interests. In exchange, we ask for the same consideration from galactic civilization. That's not acceptable. You possess capabilities that could threaten every species in the galaxy. We need assurance that those capabilities won't be used against us.
You have those assurances.
We've coexisted peacefully with galactic civilization for over a century, despite possessing these capabilities the entire time. Our revelation of them was only in response to an existential threat that your fleets couldn't handle. The situation has changed. The galaxy knows what you're capable of now. Yes, Marcus agreed. The galaxy knows that humanity is capable of defending itself and its allies against threats that conventional military forces can't handle. We had hoped that would be seen as reassuring rather than threatening. Through their bond, Zaratil felt the moment when the human collective consciousness reached a decision. It wasn't anger or aggression, but something far more unsettling. The calm determination of a species that had made peace with the possibility of having to fight alone against everyone else. Admiral Krexstar, Marcus said, his voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate through the ship's hull. Humanity withdraws its application for membership in galactic civilization. Effective immediately, we invoke the right of species sovereignty under the ancient laws that predate the current political structure. You can't, we can, and we do. Humanity claims no territory that belongs to other species, acknowledges no authority over human colonies except human government, and accepts no responsibility for the protection of civilizations that choose to view us as threats rather than allies. Humanity was essentially declaring independence from galactic civilization, withdrawing from all treaties and agreements, and establishing themselves as a completely separate political entity. What does this mean? Zaratil asked. It means that humanity is now officially isolated from the rest of the galaxy, Marcus replied. It also means that when the next crisis comes, and there will be a next crisis, galactic civilization will face it without human assistance. Through the bond, she felt the vast machinery of human preparation shifting into a new configuration. Not preparation for war, but preparation for complete self-sufficiency. Trade relationships would be severed, diplomatic ties cut, and humanity would become exactly what they had pretended to be for so long, a separate species pursuing their own destiny among the stars. The marriage bond, she said suddenly. What happens to our alliance? Marcus looked at her, and she felt through their connection the weight of the choice she now faced. That depends on whether you choose to be human or Valkyrie. 6 months after humanity's withdrawal from galactic civilization, Zaratil stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching construction crews assemble what would become the largest defensive platform ever built. The station orbited a star that hadn't appeared on any galactic chart until recently, one of dozens of systems that humanity had quietly claimed and developed over centuries of careful expansion. Through her bond with Marcus, she could feel the vast network of human consciousness directing the construction with precision that defied conventional understanding of project management. 40 billion minds working in perfect coordination, each contributing their expertise to a collective effort that spans star systems. She had made her choice 3 months ago, when the Valkyrie government demanded she return home and dissolve her marriage to preserve diplomatic relations with the rest of the galaxy. Her response had been to formally renounce her title and request political asylum among humanity's hidden colonies. Any regrets? Marcus asked, joining her at the viewing portal. Their bond had deepened considerably since her integration into the human collective, allowing them to share thoughts and emotions with an intimacy that went far beyond conventional marriage. About leaving my people? Sometimes. Dotted, she watched a massive construction module slide into place, its movement guided by human workers whose enhanced capabilities allowed them to function in hard vacuum without protection.
About choosing this life?
Never. Through the network connections, she could feel the subtle approval of 40 billion human minds. Her integration had been controversial initially, the first non-human to join the collective consciousness, but her loyalty had been proven during the crisis that followed humanity's withdrawal from galactic politics. The hegemony had attempted to blockade human space, demanding that humanity submit to external oversight of their military capabilities. The response had been swift and educational. Human fleets had emerged from concealment throughout hegemony territory, not to attack, but to demonstrate that humanity had been capable of striking any target in their space for generations without them knowing it. The blockade had lasted exactly 6 hours. Status report from the outer perimeter, came a voice through the network. One of the scout captains monitoring the edge of human space. The 3 new species have requested permission to establish diplomatic contact. Approval likelihood? Marcus asked, his attention split between the conversation and the construction project they were observing. PC. Defensive culture, minimal expansion history, demonstrated respect for territorial boundaries, moderate for the silicate communion, limited interaction history, but their crystalline nature might make them immune to void hunter predation. Low for the Terran Liberation Front. Zaratiel felt surprise ripple through the network. Humans asking to join humanity? Separatist colony from the Outer Rim? They claim their ancestors were exiled from Earth 12,000 years ago during the first Void Hunter invasion. Genetic analysis confirms human origin, but their culture has diverged significantly. It was one of many surprises that had emerged during humanity's withdrawal from galactic civilization. The species that had been thought extinct were revealing themselves. Ancient human colonies that had been considered myths were declaring their continued existence, and entities that predated current galactic civilization were emerging from hidden places to observe the changes. What's the recommendation? Marcus asked. Cautious contact. If they're genuinely human, integration into the collective should be possible. If there's something else wearing human appearance, the thought trailed off, but Zaratiel could sense the underlying concern through the network. Natives had attracted attention from entities that weren't part of conventional galactic civilization, things that existed in the dark between stars, ancient intelligences that had been sleeping in dead systems, and predators that made the Void Hunters look simple by comparison. Speaking of unusual contacts, Zaratiel said, what's the status of the Velkari situation? Through the network, she felt Marcus accessing reports from intelligence operatives who had been monitoring her former people. The news wasn't good. Without human protection, the Velkari outer colonies had come under attack from raiders who had previously avoided their space out of respect for what they thought was a human alliance. 7 colonies under siege, 2 abandoned entirely assistance, Marcus reported. They're not getting it. Most species are too focused on their own security to spare resources for mutual defense. The world of researching humanity was secretly backing them up, Zaratiel said bitterly. Your people made their choice. They chose political expedience over practical alliance. It was true, but it still hurt. Through the network, she could sense detailed analyses of how galactic civilization was fragmenting without human involvement. Trade routes that had been secure for centuries were now piracy-ridden. Exploration efforts had stalled. As species focused on defending their core territories, technological advancement had slowed without access to human innovations that had been quietly shared through seemingly independent research. Alert status change, came an urgent voice through the network. Long-range sensors detect massive energy signatures approaching from intergalactic space. A configuration unknown, but scale suggests fleet strength deployment. Marcus's attention snapped to full focus, and through their bond, Zaratiel felt the entire human collective consciousness shift into crisis mode. 0.4 billion minds suddenly turned toward the threat, analyzing sensor data and preparing response scenarios with terrifying efficiency. Void Hunters, she asked? Signatures are different. Energy signatures are different. More organized, more complex. This isn't a feeding swarm, it's a purposeful expedition. The sensor data began flowing through the network, and Zaratiel gasped as she saw the true scale of what was approaching. Ships the size of moons, energy constructs that spanned thousands of kilometers, and moving among them entities so massive that their gravitational fields were affecting stellar mechanics and systems they passed through. What are they? She whispered. They're unknown, Marcus replied, but through their bond she felt his suspicion. But they're heading directly for galactic core space. Whatever they want, it's not random exploration. Through the network came reports from human observation posts scattered throughout the galaxy. The approaching fleet was following a direct course toward the most heavily populated systems, and preliminary analysis suggested they would arrive within weeks rather than months. Are they hostile? Unknown. But ships that size don't travel in formation unless they're prepared for resistance. The human collective consciousness was already shifting into war planning mode, but this was different from the Void Hunter crisis. That had been a threat they understood, entities they had encountered before and developed countermeasures against. This was something new, something that might require capabilities humanity had never tested. Emergency session of the Collective Council, Marcus announced, his voice carrying through the network to command nodes across human space. All primary minds, report for strategic consultation. Zaratiel had witnessed Collective Council sessions before, but this one felt different. Instead of the usual distributed decision-making process, she sensed urgent focus from the most experienced minds in human space, individuals who remembered the last Void Hunter invasion, who had spent lifetimes preparing for threats that conventional civilizations couldn't imagine. Analysis suggests the approaching fleet represents a force comparable to a Type 3 civilization on the Kardashev scale, reported one of the primary minds. Energy output suggests they can manipulate stellar-scale phenomena for military purposes. Extreme. If hostile, they possess sufficient capability to destroy galactic civilization entirely. Through the network, Zaratiel felt the weight of decisions settling on the collective consciousness. Humanity could retreat to their most hidden colonies, withdraw to prepared fallback positions, and attempt to wait out whatever was coming. Or they could do what they had always done when faced with impossible threats, find a way to fight back. Galactic Council status? Marcus asked. Determined secession called, but no productive results. Most species are demanding that humanity provide protection while simultaneously refusing to acknowledge legitimate human territorial claims. They want us to fight their battles while denying us the right to exist as equals, Zaratiel said. Standard political response to existential crisis, came the reply from the network. Fear makes species short-sighted. Through her enhanced connection to the collective consciousness, Zaratiel could sense the debate raging among 40 billion human minds. Some argued for isolation. Let galactic civilization face this threat alone and deal with the consequences. Others advocated for selective intervention. Protect species that had shown friendship to humanity while leaving hostile civilizations to their fate. But there was a third option, one that emerged from the deepest levels of human strategic thinking: revelation. We could show them what we really are, Marcus said, voicing the thought that was crystallizing throughout the network. Not just our defensive capabilities or our ability to fight entities like the Void Hunters. Everything. What do you mean? I mean that for 12,000 years, humanity has been holding back. We've shown the galaxy a fraction of our capabilities because we hoped we could coexist without revealing the full scope of what we've become. Through the bond, she felt him accessing memories that went beyond individual experience. Collective memories of the species, shared recollections of their transformation during the last great crisis. Humanity hadn't just learned to fight entities that fed on life force. They had learned to become entities that could match anything the universe threw at them. The approaching fleet represents a Type 3 civilization, Marcus continued. But humanity achieved Type 4 status 3,000 years ago. We've just never had reason to demonstrate it. The implications were staggering. A Type 4 civilization could manipulate universal constants, restructure reality on a galactic scale, and exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. If humanity possessed that level of capability, they weren't just another species sharing the galaxy with others. They were something fundamentally different from anything else that existed in known space. Why hide something like that? Because once you reveal that level of capability, everything changes. Other species either worship you as gods or unite against you as an existential threat. There's no middle ground. Through the network, she felt the moment when the collective consciousness reached its decision. The approaching fleet represented a threat that conventional military response couldn't handle. The choice was simple: reveal humanity's true nature and deal with the consequences, or watch galactic civilization be destroyed by forces beyond their ability to resist. All stations, this is Admiral Chen speaking for the Collective Council, Marcus said, his voice carrying through the network to every human colony in the galaxy. Initiate Ascension Protocol. Begin transition to full-scale mobilization. Across human space, changes began that defied every law of physics that conventional science understood. Planets that had appeared to be simple colonies revealed themselves as massive construction facilities that had been building incomprehensible technologies for millennia. Stars began shifting in their orbits as humanity activated engineering projects that operated on stellar scales. And through it all, 40 billion human minds worked in perfect coordination to prepare for a conflict that would determine the future of everything that existed in their galaxy.
What happens now?
Zaratiel asked. Now we find out whether the universe is big enough for 2 Type 4 civilizations, Marcus replied, as reality itself began to reshape around humanity's awakening power. And we hope that when this is over, there's still something recognizable left of the civilization we're trying to protect. Above them, the stars themselves began to move in patterns that spelled out messages and gravitational waves. Humanity's announcement to the universe that the age of hiding was over, and the time for judgment had begun.